lead up our cybersecurity and consulting division at Convergence Networks. We have cybersecurity consultants, assessors doing assessments against various frameworks, as well as you can consider them hackers, but we call them penetration testers or ethical hackers, taking advantage of our client networks, bound on scopes of agreement, not without their knowledge, of course. I've been with Convergence Networks for about 7 years now. I've been in the IT industry, MSP industry for about 20. I got my master's in cybersecurity a few years ago. Lots of acronyms after my name, like Jack mentioned. And I'm just excited to be here to share some of our stories and where we see the industry going, and hopefully get some recommendations to you all to help further your businesses.
Thanks, Jonathan. Stephen.
So I'm Stephen Quintana. As you heard a bit of my intro from Jack already, I'll keep it pretty brief. But with Woodruff Sawyer, we're a insurance brokerage, and my specific area of expertise is cybersecurity insurance. For those of you in the room who have dealt with cyber insurance in the past, you know that it's been a pretty volatile product over the last couple of years. And I could tell you over the past probably 9 years working in this specific space, we've seen a lot of different market cycles, and we've seen a significant evolution of how this product is underwritten, and certainly how it actually plays out from a loss standpoint. So looking forward to share some of those stories, answer questions today, and thanks for everybody for being here.
And last but not least, Dave Borden.
Thanks, Jack. So my name is Dave Borden. I'm the Director of Information Technology at Wilcox Flegel Oil Co. And I'm a relatively new member to the IT community. Up until about 4 years ago, my experience of almost 30 years at Wilcox Flegel and 4 subsequent companies before that was in sales and operations. And so I find myself in this new position. And I want to take just a moment to say thanks and appreciation to Jack and Jonathan for inviting me to act in this role today in this event. And I was kind of surprised that they asked me to do this, with being my limited background in IT. And I also let them know that I've got a couple other limiting factors. Number one, I'm a really high on the introvert scale in Myers-Briggs, which could be a little precarious in this kind of an environment. And number two, I suffer from minor cognitive impairment. So that didn't seem to sway them very much. So here I am, a hermit with brain damage and not much to go on. So as we started assembling the material for this event and reviewing it, it became more apparent why they asked me to be here. And that is that a lot of the material that we're going to cover today that's going to guide our conversation and our discussion is indicative and symbolic of the journey that we've been on at Wilcox Flegel for the last 18 months. We're a company with a lot of legacy processes and not a lot of IT organization in the company. And so from teaming up with Convergence, going through vulnerability assessments, looking for gaps in our cybersecurity posture, putting controls in place, attaining cybersecurity insurance, and then building out a roadmap for the future on how we try to stay ahead of this stuff, because this landscape changes pretty rapidly. And for somebody in my capacity with, again, my limited background, it could be a little daunting. So this is really good information. I would ask our audience graciously to help me out a little bit here today, given my limitations. Ask a lot of questions. Engage in this and get everything that you can from these individuals. These guys are experts at what they do. We wouldn't be where we're at today without the help that Convergence has given us, and we're really excited about our future roadmap. We're in the middle of an ERP migration. We're in the middle of a full-scale digital transformation to the cloud, and these guys have been with us every step of the way, holding our hand through it. It's been very productive. So why does all of this matter to our business? Show of hands, how many people here use Microsoft Teams? in the business as usual, okay? Expected that. How many people are interested in ChatGPT to incorporate and streamline the way we do business? How many people have been the victim of a cybersecurity attack or know somebody that has been the victim of a cybersecurity attack? Okay, lots of hands, lots of hands. I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to talk about some of these threats, current day threats that are out there, and things that executives should be aware of in the current business environment. So Jonathan, you want to talk to that?
That was a great intro, Dave. Thank you. You know, the first thing I would say is I want to make sure we're all level set with what a threat is, you know, and when we're talking about threats, think of it as a malicious event that takes advantage of a vulnerability. So it requires a vulnerability to be in place for that threat to even exist, right? So when we're talking threats, think about viruses, ransomware, data breaches, data loss, data corruption, business email compromises, financial losses, even denial of service attacks, or complete interrupted services where your business is completely down. You know, those are all things I think that are at the top of mind of most people in the room when they think about cybersecurity incidents. You know, and the funny thing is when you peel all those layers back and you look at what the root vulnerability was, in most all cases it comes down to things like misconfigurations. Maybe you have 6 firewalls, but you had deployed 4 of them correctly, and 2 of them you forgot to change a couple settings. You know, there's no standardized configurations. Another big one we're seeing almost daily right now is patch management. You know, not having a good understanding of all the assets you have in your environment, as well as the vulnerabilities that may be dormant on those devices. And then user errors. You know, we always hear that users are the weakest link. Sometimes I like to debate that a little bit, because I think users can be the strongest link if they're properly trained and have the tools and resources available to stop that at the outset of things, rather than becoming the weakest link or a problem, right? But yeah, I would say those are probably the biggest risks that we're seeing right now in modern business.
And Jonathan, how do emerging technologies like AI and IoT introduce new vulnerabilities, and what are some of the strategies that businesses can adopt to safeguard against that?
That's a great question. You know, when we're talking about modern threats and the lay of the land, I think the most important thing for people to realize is, you know, the information of things, IoT, is not just your thermostat. It's every internet connected device that's around you, you know, and they're proliferating in environments week over week, month over month. You know, traditionally 5-10 years ago, you may have network hardware devices like laptops, computers, firewall switches, but now you have things like computers integrated to TVs, video cameras, thermostats, all kinds of little widgets and doodads that are all connecting to the internet, and it greatly increases the attack surface of modern businesses, because most IT departments just aren't equipped to handle that level of engagement. You know, they're used to dealing with workstations, servers, switches, your general IT stuff, and now all of a sudden, you know, another department wants to bring in little doodads and widgets. Does IT know about those? Are they properly being maintained? And so we're seeing attack surfaces increase pretty dramatically through these, we'll call them weak security protocols that are on newer Internet of Things devices. Like your fridge isn't going to have the same quality of internet security as maybe a firewall would, right? And so understanding those assets, where they're at, and coming up with a standardized way to approach them, whether it's limiting the information they have access to, you know, just to give a quick example, there's a hospital that we worked with recently that, you know, they were doing the right thing by segmenting their network and trying to separate services to prevent an IoT device from, say, accessing payment information. But unfortunately, it wasn't set up correctly or wasn't validated, and so what they were left with was a bunch of segmented networks that were all still connected, and you could just jump from one to the other. And so a malicious attacker was sitting in the parking lot, got on the guest Wi-Fi, and was able to get all the way to the domain controllers and the servers and capture payment information, health card information, and it resulted in a rather large breach to them as an organization, upwards of, I think it was like $1.5 million, and they had to come out of pocket around $400,000 to get built back up. And that's not to mention the downtime, the impact from not only financially, but the reputation, in the industry. They had doctors leave because they couldn't do their jobs and wanted to go work somewhere where they could actually perform. The trickle down effect of it is just, it's pretty dramatic when you take a step back and look at it. You have anything you want to add to that, Stephen?
No, I mean, it ties just directly into when you think about the threats right now. You kind of start by just thinking a little bit about the adversary and the individuals and groups that are behind this. I mean, it's clear to those folks that are in, the position of cyber defender, and it's probably clear to us that just read about it day in and day out, is that the groups and individuals that are behind this are sophisticated, they're often well organized, and unfortunately, I think very well funded. I mean, when you look at sort of current day threats, we mentioned the Move It incident. I saw a estimate that the group that was behind it was expected to net $100 million, and they're not even one of the most sophisticated or largest sort of Russian-affiliated cyber gang. And certainly some of that money goes into the pockets of the criminals that are at the group, but some of that can be helped to iterate, to improve on future attacks, to broaden the impact of their next attack, to incorporate new technologies into the way that they're going after critical systems. And so it is a little alarming. I think it's an indication that clearly this is an existential threat to businesses right now, and there's no real indication that it's going to be going away anytime soon, certainly as we continue to lean on the technology to just operate day in and day out.
So Stephen, this current landscape that we've got, and Jonathan, just to your point, we're all trying to figure out better ways to run our business and how to streamline things and be more efficient and bolster the bottom line, especially after what we've been through the last 5 years and the pandemic and all that. And some of what Jonathan was referring to, with this, I'm an employee and I'm trying to do something a more efficient way, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to grab this template offline and I'm going to bring it down, and now all of a sudden we've got a vulnerability in our system. And that's what we lovingly refer to at Wilcox Flegel as IT cowboying. But it happens, right? People are just trying to do their jobs, and so having controls in place and having some oversight there certainly helps. Stephen, to your point, the current landscape and what's out there, and it's always changing. How do these things impact insurance premiums for business owners?
I mean, I suspect there's some people here that could comment on what the impact was to insurance premiums from some of these threats, but no, I mean, truly, when these policies were first written 15 years ago, and even as they went through a couple iterations, there was this kind of throw-in component of coverage called cyber extortion. And for years it was, so that, we're not seeing any real loss activity. There's, some $1,000 payments here or there to the criminals that are extorting companies around this. Well, that changed pretty dramatically. And I think in 2020, 2021, we saw the biggest reaction from the insurance carriers, who were effectively indicating that the losses that they were paying out, primarily due to ransomware, were outpacing the premiums that they were taking in. And so it led to a total repricing of the insurance itself, where it was believed to be a 1 in 100 year event was happening far more frequently than 1 in 100 years. And so that repricing, we saw it over the course of 2020 and 2021, and a little into 2022 as well. That sort of was the immediate reaction. I think it's led to carriers feeling like they've stabilized a little bit, but it certainly drove what was a fairly nominal spend to something that is becoming a larger and larger component of a risk management team's budget or finance team's budget. And it kind of starts in it very much starts with ransomware. And so I guess just kind of helping put that into context, I think folks probably have come across this threat or have heard about it or have read about it, maybe have experienced it themselves. But one thing that I just find is a little bit helpful to set context, especially when you start to talk about controls and how to help reduce your premiums, is just thinking about how a ransomware threat sort of evolves. And just the basic timeline that you can see on the screen is generally how these things operate. They always have some different versions, but it starts with some threat actor gaining some initial access into the network. John made a case for just some poor configuration, phishing, but ultimately after the threat actor has a foothold in the network, generally goes about looking internally to see where the crown jewels are held. Performs the reconnaissance, move laterally within the network, try to avoid detection, and ultimately find something that's going to give some leverage over the company, and whether that be some critical data, some confidential data that they want to exfiltrate and ultimately sort of hold hostage and threaten to release it, or find access to some critical systems that they can shut down to cause chaos and again gain leverage over the victim. And so, after that reconnaissance, possibly stealing data, leads to deploying, in some cases deploying a sort of encryption attack, ransomware attack, and then extorting the company. Of course, then that leads to cyber insurance, but kind of helps set some context for how these incidents develop. And what we'll kind of dive into is the various layers of defense that are required to help mitigate the impact of these attacks, and then in turn how that impacts specific premiums. But Jonathan, anything just to add about sort of the life cycle of a ransomware attack here?
Did you have something, John?
Go ahead and finish. I'll ask in a moment.
From a cybersecurity perspective, when you think of insurance, they're there to help cover losses or help you get back on your feet. Cybersecurity, we're taking a slightly different approach because we're focused on preventing it or reacting to it in a timely fashion to minimize the risk, And I think that's probably the most important thing I would say right here, just so we're all on the same page, is if you don't have an incident response plan, please make one. And if you do have one, please know where it is and test it. Because most incident response plans are covered in dust, nobody knows where they're at, and then an incident comes and everybody's heads are on fire. We try to work with our clients to do some sort of regular cadence tabletop exercises. If any of you are familiar with like Dungeons and Dragons, we have like special dice that we'll roll and it gives us a random scenario like COVID or an asteroid hits your main building, go, right? And we physically work through it and find out where the gaps are, and almost every single one of them at the incident identification stage, when you're first identifying, is this truly an incident? It says contact your insurance, because your insurance provider, your premium, what you have there has very specific guidelines on what you can and what you can't do when an incident occurs. And if you're not leveraging that and you try to go, as they put it, cowboy into it, you might void some of your coverage or not be able to rely on your policy if you deleted or didn't capture the evidence they were looking for or contact them in a timely manner. So I'd say one, it's really about having a tried and true incident response plan, but two, also knowing when the inflection point is to engage with insurance to make sure, because you don't want to hide anything. That's the last thing you want to do, but you want to get them engaged as soon as possible so they can guide you down the right path, because they may have additional resources, forensics that they can bring in, and things like that. So I would say that's probably the most important step.
And go ahead, John.
Yeah, so, Stephen, earlier you talked about the changes in premiums in 2021 and 22. One of the things I've noticed really from my side, I'm a VCIO with Convergence, by the way. One of the things I've known on my side in working with clients and going through questionnaires to prepare for cyber policies is a lot of the things that were recommendations before 2021 are now requirements.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how y'all could talk about kind of that shift in mentality, and not only, Jonathan, like you're saying, trying to get ahead of it by doing more of these recommended things that we've been saying for years and years, but also what that means to businesses now for these requirements that maybe they've just taken for granted over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, it went from a nice to have to a need to have pretty quickly. Because, I mean, it's no surprise that after an insurance company, pays out $5 million towards a specific loss, they want to see that you learn from that, and they're gonna quickly learn from what happened on that case and then apply it across their entire portfolio. And so, I mean, it did lead to a fairly chaotic time for the folks, and I'm sure some folks in this room, that had to respond to these questionnaires, because they were growing and growing. Another one was being added, to the point where you're answering 100 questions for one specific line of insurance. But the truth is, these carriers were trying to keep up with what they saw was a key mitigating factor for actual losses that they were paying out on. And I mean, some of those are reflected on the slide right here. I mean, various things. I think folks that weren't familiar with multi-factor authentication a couple years ago quickly found out that that was becoming far more critical, just from a control standpoint, but certainly from a obtaining insurance standpoint. And so I think it's a somewhat natural development for this type of insurance, is that carriers learn, and they're going to incorporate that into the questions that they ask year over year. And I think, as much as for folks that have to answer these questions, it would be nice for them to be static, but the reality is technology is not static, and neither are the threats. And so I do expect that 12 months from now, there's going to be a new question being asked by insurance companies that is not currently being asked because of some actual event that's occurred.
Yeah, here's another one of those parallels that I mentioned earlier. Our quest to obtain a cyber insurance policy, we ran into the very same thing. We'd fill out the questionnaire, turn it in, and then another question would come back and, well, no, we don't have that in place. Well, you're gonna need to have it in place. And so we go back to the drawing board, and I think we did this about 3 times before we were finally we had all the requirements and the boxes checked to be able to actually obtain a policy. And it was a long road, but it was changing rapidly. This was over a period of about 4 months. So getting those pieces in place, the controls that you talked about, Jonathan, multi-factor, things like mobile device management, MDR, all critical pieces, I think, that are just basic requirements today.
And I mean, Dave, what I would sort of expand on that to say is, not just reacting to what happened in 21 and 22, as these insurance companies sort of were able to stabilize their books, they felt that they were charging an adequate premium. In some cases, they were charging too much for what was necessary. What we have seen as the insurance market has improved is that, somewhat obviously, those companies that are doing the right things are seeing outsized benefits from those that are not. And so, as much as we may not be seeing the tripling of premiums that we were seeing in the likes of 21 and 22, we see a divergence between maybe a bad risk, as the insurance carriers would think about it, from a really good one. So it's as much as things have improved a little bit, it still sort of emphasizes the importance of continuing to invest in these things, certainly just from the insurance budget side.
Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah.
So now we've talked a little bit about the landscape and the threats. Knowing how you posture yourself against these things, and the package that you put together from a security standpoint, it really depends on what type of business you are, what vertical you operate in, the size of the company, the types of data that you're trying to protect, and a lot of other aspects, a lot of variables. You could come out and you could say, well, I'm going to do A, B, C, D, E, and all the way through. And it could be overkill. But what is right for your company? And first, I think understanding what you're trying to protect, what is the data that is at risk, and how does that impact your exposure. Jonathan, can you talk a little bit about data classification and understand why that's important when you're starting to line out this cybersecurity posture?
Absolutely. Before I jump to that, can you go back a slide real quick, Jack? See all those control, we'll call them controls, items up there that you can do to hopefully prevent or reduce the risk of a ransomware attack? I'm gonna give you guys a pro tip. None of those are new. They've been in cybersecurity frameworks for years, and most large organizations, so like NSA, CISA, the SEC, FCC, they all recommend small to medium-sized businesses follow some sort of cybersecurity framework that incorporates all of those and plus a bunch of other stuff. So guess what? Next year, when they come out with a new item, if you're already addressing it through your cybersecurity program and you're already achieving something like NIST CSF, NIST cybersecurity framework, which is the general one that's recommended to most businesses, all those controls are in there plus some. So if you have that done and you can show evidence to the insurance provider that you've not only met those requirements plus some other ones, that you're ahead of the game, that bodes really well for you as a business long term. And you're essentially being proactive instead of reacting to them whenever they have a new requirement and you jump. You're already there. You said, oh, just go look here, we're done. But more back to the data classification point.
Good point, Jonathan. Thank you for adding that.
Yeah. So I can't tell you how many times I've been in a meeting with a potential client who has some cybersecurity questions, and I ask them point blank, do you have any cybersecurity requirements? And the answer is almost always no. No, we don't. We're a small shop. We're doing things our own way. 3 or 4 questions later, do you process credit cards? Do you have sensitive information? Oh yeah. Oh, we do that. Oh, we have that. And I think that's where a lot of the I guess I'll call it issue comes to play here, is that most businesses don't go through the level of data classification or understanding of the types of information that they have within their business to understand what the requirements might be. If you don't understand that you're processing, transmitting, or storing credit card information on a POS system on your network, that you have to abide by PCI, there's a whole set of requirements associated with that, like segmenting your network, annual training, pen testing it, and if you're not following those, all of a sudden, year comes around, your merchant provider asks you to fill out a questionnaire, much like an insurance one, and you can't answer any of those questions, they stop allowing you to process payments. They back bill you or fine you for all the months that you've missed where you haven't been compliant, and then all of a sudden you have a fine and you can't process credit cards. So that's why it's critical to go through that process of understanding your information and I like to use the body analogy, so forgive me if it's a little crass for everybody, but the information comes in from various methods, but it's all going in the mouth. You're chewing it up, it's digesting between your departments, artifacts are created, additional supporting documentation is created, and then eventually there's an output process, right? Wherever that touches your business inside, infects it essentially, right? So if credit card information is touching those various departments, you now have PCI requirements across all those same departments. Same thing holds true for personally identifiable information, medical information, and a lot of other ones out there. There's a lot of categories. So if you've never been through that experience, and if on my team we like to refer to it as a DFD, a data flow diagram, where you actually map it out and show what the types of information, contracts you have, how they come in, what you do with them. Until you've done that, it's really difficult to know what to put in place or how to protect your business. And I like to refer to it as like the shotgun approach. You see the next big cybersecurity thing that's going to solve all your problems, and you go spend a bunch of money on it, but you don't even know where to put it because you haven't even done the legwork to understand where your actual critical assets are, or sometimes referred to as crown jewels. So that's why I think it's uber critical for everybody to understand not only what data classification is, but the importance of it to your business and how that relates to overall cybersecurity.
Yeah, when we started this journey with Convergence, we went through a data classification process where we sat down with basically every department operating in our company across 4 major lines of business, and really dug into exactly what Jonathan's talking about, the types of data and how it's being stored within our network, how it's being shared across departments, and there's some eye openers there. A lot of things that we didn't realize that were vulnerabilities and then we had to develop internal controls to put in place to make sure that that we were protecting that just so that we could be, in some cases PCI compliant, in other cases HIPAA compliant. So it's a lot to try to take in, and it certainly helps to have somebody guiding the way.
Dave, I might just add, just layering in the insurance side. I mean, one thing that folks find when you have to go through the questionnaire process is you're asked about some specific things about how much information do you store, how much do you collect, what type of information are you storing. And while it is sometimes a challenging exercise to answer that clearly, when you answer it without any specific number, you're generally going to get a very conservative response from the insurance provider. And so there is some ROI just from understanding what we have in terms of being able to say very clearly to an insurance carrier, we know this is how much information we have, this is where it's stored, because that way you're not going to be sort of painted with a broad brush, which is something we always want to avoid.
Very good point, and that came into play in ours as well. So another question for you, Stephen. How do insurance providers tailor coverage based on a company's specific cyber risk profile?
Yeah, that's a key part when we kind of bring it back to the title of this session of sort of optimizing your spend. You certainly want to make sure that the policy that you're purchasing is relevant for your specific business. These policies are far from being standardized. There's certainly some components of coverage that are very important and very relevant to some businesses that may not be relevant or that critical to others. And I think frankly, part of the exercise that we serve in representing folks to go out and get this insurance is helping them understand what parts of the coverage are actually that meaningful to them, and what are the pieces that ought to be in place, what are components that frankly can be more optional than others. And so simple examples, I mean, John was just talking about the data classification exercise of understanding what type of information do you hold. If you don't collect or you don't transact with credit card information, there's a specific component of coverage that's not that relevant to your business. You don't need to pay for that type of coverage. If you're in a company that's a little bit more on the operational side, doesn't store a lot of critical information, but you're relying upon computer systems to be operating, then the business interruption component of coverage is going to be the most important piece of the insurance policy. And so it certainly is leaning on the experts to help you understand what parts of the policy are relevant and what are not. I mean, I'll tell you, the insurance companies would be happy to sell you sort of all the bells and whistles, but you may not need all of them. So yeah, it's about making sure you're kind of going in eyes wide open to what's included and what's not.
Okay. And how do you, Jonathan, for you, how do cybersecurity firms work in tandem with insurance providers to offer a holistic protection strategy for businesses?
We hold webinars. We do this, right?
We do this.
I mentioned this before, but you can think of them as insurance providers are there once something's happened, right? You're going to leverage your coverage based on the event. Whereas the cybersecurity firms or your IT sometimes are now doing cybersecurity as well. They're on the front end of that, right? So they're the ones that are going to be containing the incident. They're going to be the ones responding to potential incidents, reaching out to the insurance provider to get clarity on what exactly steps they should take. So I think probably the biggest thing is to not treat it like an adversarial relationship and try to treat it like a partnership, even though that sounds kind of weird to be partners with the insurance because everybody always gives insurance a bad name, no offense, Stephen, but it really is about that, because if as I mentioned earlier, Stephen said that next year there's going to be a new control on that list. And if you remember what I said, those controls are already on a list somewhere. They're just pulling another one off that they think is going to help, right? So if we know that, as a cybersecurity firm, it's in my best interest to get you as the business to follow some sort of framework, so we're there and ready for the time when that question gets popped and asked. So you become that proactive response in that sense. And I think it's really important to note that capturing information, documentation, and I know it sounds boring, but it's uber critical when it comes to incidents. You know, if you're not capturing the information and providing a reliable conduit with the insurance, it's going to make it much more difficult for you to claim or recover from an incident, you know.
Yeah, giving insurance a bad name over here. No, I mean, there's a lot of good points there, Jonathan. I mean, I think kind of tying that into this broader point of sort of optimizing the investment to sort of control your costs in this regard. It kind of all starts with just, I guess, two different components when I think about optimizing your sort of insurance spend. And the first one is obviously what's your premium dollars, what sort of annual spend is dedicated to this specific line of insurance. And the second one is sort of what's the breadth of coverage that you're actually getting. You know, how much value are you getting from this insurance contract? And it starts with what we're talking about of doing the right things and investing in the right controls. And yes, these questionnaires that are asking sort of 30 questions, yes, no, do you have these in place? What the insurance providers aren't necessarily doing is just counting up, okay, 19 yeses and 11 nos, and therefore here's your premium. I think, frankly, what we're finding is there's a lot more discretion at play, and what we're very much encouraging our clients to do is we want to help paint a picture that we recognize this is a relevant risk to our business and that we're taking proper action towards mitigating that risk. And that means that we've invested in the proper sort of people, processes, and technology, and that we're going to continue to invest in this. It's not static, and it also ties into some benefits for folks that look at that list that we had on the screen and say, well, we're not doing some of these things. That's okay. I think what's important is that you are evaluating that and thinking about, okay, we're not doing this today. Is this something that should be on the roadmap for next year? If we're not doing this today, do we have any sort of compensating controls in place that, we may say that, no, we don't have this, but we have a story to tell. We're encouraging a lot of our clients to help put these narratives together, and that's part of how we're communicating with the insurance providers, to help them understand that there's a theme here of we take this seriously, and we understand it's a risk. We're going to continue investing in this going forward. And that, frankly, that's going to lead to more insurance providers wanting to write your business, more competition, which is going to help drive down those premiums. But that in turn, the breadth of coverage piece, when you have a lot of different insurance companies that actually want to give you a policy, it gives you leverage in pushing those insurance companies to add in components of coverage or lower the threshold to get into the program, lower your deductibles, lower the waiting period that might be associated with your business interruption coverages, or expand coverage in different ways as these carriers are trying to differentiate themselves. And so it all starts with putting the proper investment in up front from a control standpoint, and we're seeing a real return for those companies that are doing that.
Yeah, so Stephen, we've been in this now for, like I said, about 18 months, and we've put a lot of controls in place. We've done a lot of things. We're working diligently to get to a point where we can live up to those NIST CSF standards, and that's kind of been the backbone that's guiding us from a cybersecurity posture standpoint. How does the insurance industry assess a cyber maturity of a company, and how can businesses improve their standing, and does that impact our investment?
Yeah. Jack, could you show the timeline screen again?
Of course.
And so no two insurance companies are using the exact same framework, but they're all sort of looking at the same themes and same sorts of controls. Frankly, a lot of the underwriting community thinks about the risk the way that's shown on the screen right now. What are you doing at the perimeter of your network to prevent somebody from gaining that initial access? Are you training your employees to be on the lookout for a specific type of phishing attacks? Is that a sort of check the box exercise, or are you evolving in a way that it's keeping up with the latest trends in phishing? Are you specifically tailoring your training towards the roles of the individuals at your company that's relevant to them. Are you training your accounting department in a different way than maybe you're training your sales staff? They're looking at what's all being done at the perimeter, but in turn, they're also looking at what's being done, that if somebody was to gain that initial access, how are you preventing them from moving laterally and gaining access to something far more critical? Jonathan's example with the hospital system, a poorly configured guest Wi-Fi and poorly configured segmentation. Had that been properly segmented, maybe somebody is sitting out there on the guest Wi-Fi, but they can't move around internally and find something far more critical. And then, importantly, they're looking at what sort of resiliency strategies are in place that if somebody were to hit you with a ransomware attack, do you have the ability to recover from backups? And not just, yes, we have backups, but have you actually tested your ability to recover from backups? You mentioned incident response testing. Do you have an IRP plan? Okay, have you tested it? Do you test it on a regular basis? Because having the plan's great, but it's sort of how you use it. And that's very much, I think, the evolution of how we're seeing the underwriters assess companies, is that at a point in time it was, do you have this? And now it's more, how are you using this? And I think that's going to be kind of a natural evolution. And as much as, there may be a new question next year that's not being asked this year, I think it's all coming from a place of how is this incorporated in your ability to stay resilient to the most popular type of attack right now, and a pretty common type of attack that we're going to expect for years to come. And I guess this is a slight tangent, but this was a question that was submitted, and I appreciate the question. There was a question asked about, do we expect stability in cyber insurance, or do we expect it to remain volatile for a long period of time? Great question. And I would say that certainly for the near future, we're expecting a lot more stability. I think we saw kind of an inflection point, as I mentioned, 21 and 22, a lot of repricing. But it seems like carriers have kind of managed their losses. We certainly hear of an uptick in ransomware losses over the last couple of months, but we don't expect that uptick to lead to a massive reaction like it has before. There's concern about specific types of events that could change things dramatically. And this is where, if I'm concerned at all about some lack of stability, carriers are focused keenly on a single event that's going to trigger hundreds of policies at once. AWS experiencing a massive outage, and all of these policies seeing claims. They haven't necessarily built their books on the ability to pay out on every single policy at the same time. That's the type of event, it's a systemic risk that has our carriers very concerned. It's led to some carriers thinking about how they want to restructure their policies. But I think if one of those black swan type events occurs, I don't think it's the end of cyber insurance. It may change the way that cyber insurance is covered. There may be a divergence in the way that they think about covering your network versus covering the extension of your network through the use of service providers. So to answer that question in maybe a less long-winded way, I do expect stability, but there are certain events out there that could vastly change the way that this product operates. I don't know if that person is here and wants to hear more about it, but I'm happy to share.
So maintaining minimal risk and continuous improvement, what do we mean by this? Here's another one of those parallels, and this kind of goes back to that comment I made about myself about brain damage. I had a stroke at 49. It's really kind of an eye-opener, and it made me take a look at my life in a different way, and the things that I was doing, from a health perspective, probably could have been taking a little bit of care of myself. But and so my life really changed dramatically. And I look at personal health as, you need to do annual checkups, right? You need to go in and consult with your doctor and see where you're at, and he's gonna make suggestions and recommendations, and then you take that back and you put it into place. And you go back the next year and you do it all over again, and you kind of try to stay ahead of things. And there's a real parallel there to a cybersecurity posture, right? It's, you know, those controls and this stuff changes all the time. I can tell you the big difference between my experience in sales and operations and my experience in IT is the things that keep me up at night. And the one that keeps me up at night the most is when that thought creeps into my head that I'm gonna walk in the morning, boot my computer up, and that cackling skull and crossbones is gonna come up on the screen saying you've been hacked and held for ransom. And so staying ahead of this stuff, it's not easy, it's changing all the time. And but having a roadmap, I talked about that roadmap too. This is a real, I think a real key component of what we're doing as a company is trying to be, have some foresight on what we're doing, and in our partnership with Convergence, the things that we continue to put in place and work on to get a more robust posture and mitigate this risk. You know, we talked about moving to the cloud. Well, just because you're moving to the cloud doesn't mean that you're any less at risk. It just means that the risks are different, right? Some of the controls that we talked about, Jonathan, how crucial is employee training in reducing cyber risks? What's a best practice that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all said it once at least already sitting up here, but I would say user education and training is paramount. It's one of the most important things businesses can do today. There's, you know, and Stephen did a great job of elaborating on it, but you know, when you think about employee training and cybersecurity training and how to reduce that risk from a human error, you know, it's not just the once a year training where everybody goes sits in a room and looks at the same old PDF for the 9th time. You know, it's actual reoccurring on some sort of frequent schedule training about emerging threats, things that are actually happening in businesses. We use a tool, there's lots of tools out there, but we use a tool that basically sends out these short little videos that are 4 minutes long. They're animated and they're based on current day threats, something that may have just happened last week, last month. So it's fresh and it's new in their minds. That's only one component of it for that general cybersecurity, what we like to call hygiene. You also want to couple that with other things like phishing simulations, so some sort of reoccurring test against the user, so you're educating them, but you also want to test to see if it's actually holding true, right? So you can adjust course or adjust fire as needed. But I think there's other things that are really important to remember too, because it's not all one size fits all. As Stephen alluded to, role-based training is extremely important, because what we're talking about with cyber hygiene with these little videos, they're not going to go into depth about how accounting should double check and pick up the phone and call somebody if they get an email from the CEO saying to send me $100 in iTunes cards, right? That's not in that 4-minute video, I can tell you that. And so understanding where your risks are and using those actual events as some sort of real life training, you know, if that occurs, take the whole finance team aside, spend 10 minutes, walk through it, show them where maybe the 0 was an O, or, you know, look at the little breadcrumb trails that are usually there, the sense of urgency, the tone, that kind of thing, right? And training on specific things that are happening to that business. That's going to get you a lot further than watching a 4-minute video. And I think the same thing holds true in a lot of departments. You know, IT has very specific tasks that they're focused on, so you would want to ensure that they have training on how to maybe grant administrator access, what to do if there's a new employee, that kind of stuff, you know? So I think it's a holistic approach with how you train your employees to respond to events that are taking place. And it's not a one-size-fits-all, but it needs to be a layered approach where you're taking different avenues like phishing, general training, role-specific training, event training, things that are actually happening, and using those as real-time feedback loops.
And it's what's interesting, John, is that, like, you know, employee training and phishing simulations, that's also, like you said, it's not new. But I think, the recent IBM report was saying, 77% of the attacks that they observed were started from phishing. And so it just remains to be a major cause. And so I think it's it's understood that employee training, so long as we continue to operate via email, I mean, it's going to be of critical importance for years to come.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have as a company is with our frontline workers. We talk about the speed of technology these days, and the cyber landscape changing so quickly. Technology is changing very quickly, and all of our frontline workers, they've got a cell phone, right? And they do everything on that cell phone. Getting them to understand that how you use a personal cell phone is a lot different than how you use our corporate business systems, and to make that distinction, because they believe that, well, this is really easy, I can do it here, you should be able to do it here just as easy. But this is not without risk. Neither is this. Jonathan mentioned the videos. We're actually subscribed to those videos, and they get pushed out every month. And the content in 4 minutes, in the way that it's laid out, is very impactful. And it could be that platform or another platform. Just getting people exposed to what's new and how serious this really is I think the first step in getting employees educated. They have to understand that this is this is serious business, and our businesses are serious businesses.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Can you two comment individually from your different perspectives on how policies and procedures within a business change that risk level, and how that impacts continuous improvement, and what your lens is from insurance, and then from your perspective, please?
Sure. Policies and procedures are very boring, let's be honest. Nobody wants to do them, and if you have them, nobody's going to read them. So I think you guys laugh, but it's true. I mean, we all operate in businesses. How many times do you guys open the policies and procedures and actually look at it? But I think that's the critical point here, is that you have to take this stuff seriously. You have to have policies in place, and you have to follow them, and you have to review them on a regular cadence to ensure that they're still accurate and they make sense for the way your business operates. And it sounds grown up or mature, like too mature for our small business mentality, but Stephen mentioned it, the cyber criminals are mature. They're not little script kiddies. You have to keep up with them, and this is part of that evolution where we have to not only have them to begin with, but we have to actually, put our big pants on and follow them, train people on them, hold people accountable to them, and really it's a top-down thing. Frequently in businesses we'll see, our consulting arm, we usually meet with executives or the top end of the business, and we consult on these policies and procedures, and oftentimes we get met with scoffs or we can't, but if they're not willing to adopt it, what makes you think the employees below them are going to adopt it? So having that top-down mentality where everybody's on board and we're all a community going to do it together, I think is important.
And I guess just to quickly add, I think policies and procedures are kind of a key sort of pillar of instilling a security-first culture, and that's pretty critical, and just goes a long way that it's not an afterthought. It's very much embedded within the culture.
Thanks.
Question.
Yes.
So where are businesses typically in their life cycle where they finally open up and say, holy crap, we got to do something about this?
So
I mean, just to put the rubber, where's the rubber meet the road here? You got people going, oh, it's never going to happen to us, and then all of a sudden it happens.
that's when they invest.
That's not a joke, that's true.
I believe it. I'm just, yeah.
Just to give you an example, I mean, not even the medical facility I was previously talking about, but another one also this year, they had an out-of-date firewall sitting on the edge that doctors would connect through. We recommended them to fix it several times. They didn't see it as a top-line concern. It was taken advantage of over a course of I think 48 hours, 1.5 terabytes of data of medical records and financial information was exfiltrated. And they didn't catch it because they didn't have a lot of those controls in place. They weren't monitoring. And the only reason they caught it was because their ISP, their internet provider, called them and said, hey, you guys are uploading a ton of data to the internet, and that doesn't seem normal. That's the only reason they caught it. Fast forward, they burned the whole place down because there was no way to prove where it came from. They had to replace all the firewalls, switches, servers, workstations. We had to put all the rest of their data through this little kiosk machine that has like 39 virus engines on it and scrub all their data. And even then it was an 80% chance that it was good. There was still 20% chance that there was malicious macros or something embedded in files. And so it became a huge issue. They had to report to the OCR, fines out the wazoo. They had to tell their clients that they leaked their information and they weren't sure who because they couldn't track it down. Because again, they didn't have controls in place to log it, detect it, and respond to it appropriately. And that's, I would say, par for the course in most cases. We see, unless it's a regulatory, some kind of external pressure from a partner or regulation dictating that they do it. It's usually once an event happens.
And I guess just to add to that, some of that external pressure, I think maybe one benefit that we've seen is that some minimal cybersecurity controls and or purchasing an insurance policy has started to be incorporated into a lot of contracts for customers, especially if you're a company that's starting to partner with larger and larger enterprises. It's becoming sort of a cost of doing business. And certainly if you're incentivized to sign on a new customer and it requires some investment in this front, we've seen that being a bit of a catalyst as well.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Just on behalf of nonprofits are often carrying personally identifiable information, and we get money from donors. And when you have to invest in infrastructure like this, it's usually your auditor who says, "Do you have anything in place?" "Sure, I do MFA on some people."
Yeah.
But it's
more external pressure.
It's a cost of it's external pressure, cost of doing business, and now we have to go out for grants that basically are supporting the infrastructure.
I want to come back to your question just for a moment. One of the things that we did early on, and this is something that you can do to identify, hey, when do we start taking action? It was a huge benefit to do a business impact analysis up front, and that's where we sat down with Convergence in this case, and started mapping out all of our critical business systems and our operational procedures, and then gave what if scenarios. If we had this system go down, what is the impact of business? How do we operate? And that could be a real eye-opener. It's kind of that preventative medicine, if you will, getting in and really digging in, and we spent probably the first 6 months of this journey just doing discovery process. We wanted to get in every nook and cranny because we'd never done it before, and we're a company that's grown through, I think, 27 or 28 acquisitions over a period of about 55 years, and a lot of legacy processes and tribal knowledge and that kind of thing. And you get in and you really start getting under the hood and digging through that. It can really open up the eyes. And when we saw some things, there were some things that, boy, it's a good thing that we're doing this now, and that really helped to drive the path forward.
Agreed.
Critical cybersecurity controls. This is something that we've been, this has been what we've been working on. The key to once we did that assessment and started looking at what were our vulnerabilities, where were our gaps, where do we need to improve. There were a whole lot of these things that we didn't have in place that we needed to get in place to mitigate risk and to be able to be in a position to obtain cyber insurance. Jonathan, can you speak to some of the controls that are up here, and what are ones that are the most critical?
Yeah, I'm glad that we took the numbers away from this slide because I think they're all extremely critical. I see a lot of stuff in my role, whether it be after the fact in incidents that are taking place through compromises, or on our ethical hacking team, what they're taking advantage of in the world. And I can tell you that the ethical hackers rely on you all not having those 8 things. And if you don't have some of those, they're getting in. Just last week, just to share a quick story, one of our penetration testers was able to essentially reach out to a company that we were targeting for a penetration test. He had a fake LinkedIn profile that he built, had friends join it, so it looked legitimate. Reached out to a few people in the company. He said, "Hey, do you like working here? I see you have a couple jobs open." They're like, "Oh yeah, it's amazing. You should apply. Here's the link to apply." It was to a website, their website, where you could upload your resume. He responded back, said, "For some reason, it's not letting me upload my document." She's like, "Okay, well, just forward it to me and I'll send it over to the HR manager." He forwarded her the document. She opened it. There was a reverse shell on it. It bypassed security because it went through LinkedIn. It wasn't even going through the typical email filters and all that stuff. He was able to set up MFA for her on his cell phone and then instantly had access to the environment. Microsoft was not configured correctly, so all users could see everything. So he was able to map out the entire environment, move laterally across, and eventually take some pretty sensitive information, and did not even touch their network. It was all just user training, basically, right? Don't open files from people you don't know. I mean, it's that simple, but it led to almost a complete takeover of their business, you know? And that's just one of many examples I could give you, but I would say that's why regular security training is so important, and not just sitting in a room once a year. It's actual things that happen, you know? Don't click links, look for special things, you know, have that real-time training feedback where you're hopefully getting the bang for your buck there. The other one I would mention before I pass it off to Stephen, I guess the bottom two on there, you know, critical vulnerabilities and configuration management go a little bit hand in hand. You know, configuration management, you can think of it as this, you know, if you have a bunch of computers, servers, software, are you setting them all up the same? Do you have a document that stipulates how they're supposed to be set up so you can ensure that they're in fact configured in a way that's manageable, right? If not, you might have, like I mentioned earlier, 4 firewalls that are good and 2 that maybe you forgot to change the default cred zone because you're moving a little too fast. And now we can get in via that mechanism and we can bypass a lot of the other secure steps and laterally move through the environment. So configuration management is huge, and vulnerability management, that goes without saying. If you're not patching, you should be patching. There are 0 days being dropped every day, new businesses getting hacked every day through software. It's paramount to be patching vulnerabilities in a timely fashion. Like the Move It breach that was up on the screen earlier, it's poised to be the biggest breach of 2023. Somewhere 1,000 businesses and 600 million records or people are affected. They estimate that it might be upwards of $65 billion in damages. The government has a $10 million reward for them. If that doesn't make it like serious to you all, I don't know what will. But yeah, do you want to?
Well, just to point out something, that's the document that everyone had in front of them. Also just elaborates on these 8 different things. So we would just encourage, if you're not the individual that owns sort of information security, maybe chatting with that individual, seeing what of these are in place, maybe what is not in place. Yes, these are 8 pretty important things on most insurers' list of what they want to see companies doing. But kind of back to some earlier points of, if something's not in place today, if there's a story around, what are some compensating controls? Yeah, maybe we don't have 24/7 eyes on glass of monitoring our network. Maybe we have it during business hours, and maybe after business hours we have kind of pager duty, where there's going to be a rotation amongst the staff as to who's responding. Having a story to tell so that if you just say no, we don't have this, but it's something that we're thinking about and it's something that we're managing in a different way, that's going to go a long way with ensuring that you're getting a cyber insurance policy, one that doesn't carry unnecessary restrictions, and that you're going to get as broad coverage as possible.
One other comment on these security controls. There's a lot of stuff that, most everybody in the room mentioned they were using Teams, and that's kind of an indicator that you're using Microsoft Office 365. And there's little things that you can do, like in Outlook, just putting that banner on an incoming email when it's from outside of your domain that says, warning, this is, and you can actually customize that message and turn it whatever color you want. Those can be very impactful. And we did that early on, and we thought, oh, well, our general frontline workers, when they get an email, they're probably not gonna pay too much attention to it. And we were dead wrong about that. When they saw that showing up, all of a sudden we started getting help desk tickets coming into our internal IT help desk saying, hey, I just got this, can you take a look at it? It looks like it might be malicious, and in some cases it actually was. So just the little things can really help out, and that gets that user awareness up and the education. It makes it, as you incorporate more and more of those things, it opens it up and it makes it a lot easier when you start tackling some of the bigger things like multi-factor authentication and VPNs with multi-factor on top of it. Those things can be painful to push out to the organization, because now people have to do this and this and this to get to where they would normally go with just a click of a mouse. But they understand it a little bit better, and it just becomes commonplace, and that helps to bring up that awareness and that what we like to talk about is technical aptitude.
Okay.
Hey, Jack, maybe I'll tackle there. I know there's one other question that was submitted.
Yeah.
It's very insurancy. So,
Yes, please.
and it's near and dear to my heart. So I think the question was something to the extent of, how do we ensure that our very dense insurance policy actually covers us, which I totally appreciate. It's what I spend a lot of my time doing, is helping clients understand what they have coverage for and what they do not. So I certainly encourage folks to lean on an expert to help you understand what the policy is doing. What I find a lot of clients of mine are doing is we're having conversations around sort of scenarios. Okay, if scenario A happens, what does our coverage look like? If scenario B happens, what does our coverage look like? To really help conceptualize what you're buying when you're buying that contract. A sort of byproduct question that I often get in this regard is, what are the gotcha exclusions that are in these policies? I'd say, frankly, a well sort of brokered policy is not going to have those gotcha exclusions. But what I would tell you is sort of the number one reason that I'd see a claim denied under a cyber policy is because of late notice to the carrier. A company basically responds to an incident totally on their own, and then sends a bill to the insurance company. That's not usually going to lead to the best possible outcome. I mean, I could talk insurance for a long time up here and bore everyone, but these policies are structured to have those resources available to the policyholder to respond to an incident, to help contain it as much as possible, to ensure that you're thinking through possible legal liabilities. And the carriers really want you to use those resources to try and minimize the total cost. And so doing all of that on your own and then sending a claim to the carrier, here we need $1.3 million, it's tough. Good luck from there. But that is what I would say is the most common issue. It's not some, oh, you didn't have MFA in place and therefore you're not getting coverage. That's not the experience that we're having. So just wanted to make sure I addressed that question. Thank you for whoever submitted it.
Yeah, appreciate that.
I'll co-sign on that. We actually had a client that had an incident just 2 days before Christmas this past year that we got involved with the insurance company almost right away to ensure that we were following all the appropriate processes and procedures. And it meant that their network was down a little bit longer because they wanted to triage the situation, make sure that no nasty extra stuff was happening, but they got paid out the full policy afterward because they followed all the rules and didn't cowboy off and go do things themselves.
It's become an annual tradition that I get a call from a client on Christmas Eve that they have an incident going on.
I had to put the family aside for a bit while they were opening presents to go get on calls. Yeah, it was a good time.
Not surprised. Bad guys like to work late on Friday and Christmas Day and holidays.
Yeah.
So open forum, any questions, can be personally related, general related, but they're here for anybody who has that. We have the room for a little bit longer, even though the 1 o'clock time frame was the schedule. So please, you have two great experts and one person who's leaving this, much like yourselves, to ask questions to. We want you all to walk away not only with just some tips on the table, but also with pieces that you can actually put into action in your businesses. Mari, go ahead.
Sorry, right before, can I have a quick favor to take a group photo?
Yeah, before we all leave or right now? After questions?
Yeah,
Yeah.
after
Thank you.
No
Who wants to go
questions.
first? Who's got a burning
I
question?
got a question. You actually answered my one about the complexity of the insurance policies. Thank you. But I'm curious. So we do a lot in my business. We're a consulting firm, big financial services companies. We have a lot of PII. We spend a fair bit on the things that we need to spend them on. We train people, all that stuff. And I'm still very convinced something will happen at some point. And so my question as a non-technologist is, how do I stay in front of all this stuff, and how do I keep my IT team accountable to staying in front of it? I can go to these things and kind of hear what's going on, and it's helpful, I can pass it along, but I'm not a technologist ultimately. So how do I know that they're really covering the bases?
It's a great
That's a
question.
big
I'm a firm believer that IT teams are not equipped to handle cybersecurity. Just with the proliferation of modern day attacks, 0 days dropping all the time, it's too much in most cases for a small IT team that's trying to manage business to also jump in and handle cybersecurity when the events come up. I really recommended to clients to go full in on cybersecurity, and if they don't have an expert in-house, work with a third-party company such as Convergence that can help bridge that gap, because you can't be a master at everything, and I think it's really important to understand that you're limited on resources as a single entity when you have like communities of cybersecurity experts that you can leverage, right, versus trying to build that in-house. So that would be my top recommendation, is if you're feeling uncomfortable or unconfident in your cybersecurity posture, evaluate it. One of my longtime mentors uses a great analogy for all finance folks out there. The bookkeepers generally are doing the day-to-day books, running the finances of the company, but on every, maybe it's annually or biannually, there's an auditor that comes in and verifies that things are still being done according to tax code or various changes in regulations. And it's no knock on that bookkeeper. It's just a way to stay current and check and balance, if you will. And I think the same approach should be taken with IT and cybersecurity. You need to evaluate your tools, your staff, your controls on some kind of regular basis to ensure that you're not only still where you should be, but are proactively heading ahead, and we generally like to recommend frameworks as a way to do that. Like NIST CSF is a really important one for a lot of medium-sized businesses right now, and it covers most of the bases that you might find from general security needs. I don't know, is that a good answer?
Yeah, and maybe what I would just add is, it's not just the companies that don't have great controls that need the insurance. Bad things still happen. So that's kind of the obvious one. But what's probably worthwhile for the security team is to ensure that they're certainly focused on sort of threat intelligence, that when something happens elsewhere, that you learn from it and that you're evolving before that same attack happens to you. And just back to the first point, I'm sure some folks saw this, but MGM Resorts, experienced a pretty significant incident that was announced yesterday, where ATMs and slot machines were down. I think part of the casino was dark and hotel guests were shut. I can tell you, they invest a significant amount in cybersecurity, and things still happen. So it certainly justifies why there's still an insurance product to kind of help from the financial implications.
And about
Put your mind a little at ease.
Yeah, the only other thing I guess, maybe it's a brief plug actually. So they did a scan on our 365 environment recently that was super helpful. And so I thought that kind of thing was good. I guess I'm trying to figure out what the next step is. How do you take that stuff and make it actionable relative to all your budgeting, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so for those of you that aren't aware, Microsoft 365 cloud environment, our pen testing team, we actually developed a new tool that actually assesses the 365 environment as well. So not only do internal, external, wireless, physical, but we also assess the cloud environment now. And it produces a formal report that shows all the risks, greatest to least, with the most critical at the top. And that's what he's referring to. But obviously you want to start with the most critical, the things that are going to be the biggest impact with the least amount of effort, right? Hit those first. But if you're not first, if you think you're in Microsoft and you're secure just because you're there, it's definitely not the case. I would like you all to think of it more of like a ball of wax. you can mold it into whatever you want, but if you don't do that, you're not necessarily going to be any more secure than you were on premises before you made the move to the cloud. So it's very important. Configuration management and things like that are taking an approach when you move all of your assets into the cloud. But aside from that, I think it's important, just like any other assessment or regular check-in with your business, is to evaluate the tools that you're using to determine where those risks are. And generally we help our clients with, if any of you are familiar with it, a risk register, where we identify things or vulnerabilities or threats in the environment. And maybe we're not going to do anything about it right now, so we identify it as a risk. We say what the plan is, and then we move on. We either accept the risk, we say we know it's gonna be $1 million if it ever happens, hopefully it doesn't. And then the board or executives can manage by, through the risk register to hopefully achieve the best balance, if you will.
And I can make a comment here. I was in your position about 4 years ago. And the primary driver for me being in the position that I'm in now wasn't because of my IT background. It was more to take the internal IT resources that we had, which were really a couple of individuals that did this and did that, and one that had been responsible for managing the network for a number of years, and really assemble them into a high functioning team. And you talked about accountability and how do I manage that. We understood, and I did an internal IT assessment when I came into this position and found a lot of gaps, but it was really apparent that we needed to, even if we took folks and brought in an additional headcount with some additional skill set to manage things internally, we still needed to have a partnership. And I'm not trying to give you guys a plug, Jonathan, by any means. But it certainly helps to have somebody. We could have made the investment and went out and tried to find individuals with credentials like Jonathan's to address it internally. That wasn't feasible for where we were at the time. But what we did was we found the right people that had the right interest and maybe not a degree, and put them in a position and gave them the tools and resources that they could go and take Microsoft certification classes or cybersecurity, CompTIA classes, and get their level of understanding of the IT environment up to a level where when they do work with our MSP, they can communicate cohesively on the objectives, and it makes it a lot easier I know it's made it a lot easier for Convergence to get things done. And we look at it as, this is core to what we're doing in our department. This is, we're here to support the company, and we need to, position ourselves to mitigate against this stuff. And it, having that kind of 1-2 approach to it has really been, I've got a team of guys. I'm very fortunate to have a team of young individuals who are very motivated and very talented to work in conjunction, and it makes the accountability piece a lot easier. But we've got a roadmap too, and we're checking off the boxes on that roadmap as well.
Thanks, Ben. Any other questions? Anybody have a burning question they want to go over? Our team is available. Your contact information is there for any one of the individuals